Well, good evening. It's nice to be here. Andrea's given me a few tasks. I've got an hour, no more, and I've promised her that I'll make it interactive. So what I'd like to do tonight is I'd like to share with you what happens when worlds collide. We will have a conversation about why worlds collide. I'm going to give you some examples of that. We're going to break into groups and we're going to have a discussion about the worlds that you live in. At some point, we're going to hand out some coloured caps and we're going to have a larger debate about the world that we live in. We're going to start looking at some global themes. But I don't know if you agree with me or not, but in my life, working with hundreds of people and hundreds of organisations, when I walk into an organisation as a coach or a consultant or a speaker, there's always an elephant in the room. Who's got an elephant in the room in their organisation right now? A number of you, yes. Now sometimes we can't see the elephant in the room, and that's the problem. But there's the one that we don't speak about as well. So tonight's going to be a search for the elephant in the room. All right. Tonight what I want to do is I want to share some information about worldviews, and I want to offer you a worldview of worldviews. Hopefully you've not had too much wine to work that one out, but I'm going to offer you a paradigm to think about worldviews. And these worldviews are very much values-based. And what I'm finding in the leadership space is that leadership is moving more into the values-based issues. We need to deal with the values-based issues in our organisation. So I want to offer you a model around that. I want to tell you a story about a gentleman who's the same age as me. And we had a similar experience. At the age of 7, I was attending an elementary school in California in the United States. And I went to an elementary school in Palo Alto. My father was at Stanford, and the house we lived in was 5 minutes from the headquarters of Google, Amazon and Facebook. So I was in an up-and-coming suburb in about 1970. But this other gentleman, his name was Jarvis. He was going to elementary school in Long Beach, California, which is just south of LA, about 400 miles south of where I was. And he was in a black neighbourhood. He was in a very poor neighbourhood. Had a very different experience to me. So I want to talk a little about my journey and his journey as we go through. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little fable, a little analogy that might help us understand the topic tonight. And it goes a bit like this. There were these two young fish swimming along, just swimming along like fish do. And coming in the opposite direction was a much older fish. And as they got closer and they were going to pass each other, the older fish said, "Hey fellas!" And they looked up and they nodded. And the older fish said, "How's the water today?" And they looked at each other and they didn't know what to say, so they just kept swimming. Just keep swimming, which is what fishes tend to do. But after a little while, one of the younger fishes started to think, "How's the water today?" And it turned to the other little fish and said, "What's water? What's water?" So if a fish says, "What's water?" what's the meaning we can take from that story? Anybody?
Culture.
Culture. Yes, so the fish has an environment. What does the fish not realise? The environment's everywhere around it, yeah. Can the little fish sense the environment? No. It's always been there. So that water is like the elephant in the room. So the question is about water. The fish has no reference for that. What's another meaning we could take from this little parable? If we take the words, "How's the water today?" What was the older fish really asking? When you ask someone a question like that, what are you really asking?
How are you experiencing the water?
How are you experiencing the water? Yeah, absolutely. So the older fish was trying to elicit a projection from them about how they were feeling onto the water, onto their environment. And the more I go down the rabbit hole, the more I see the human beings don't experience the water, the world as it is. We experience the world as we are. All right, so we're going to drill into that a little bit tonight and see how we create our worlds and how we can free ourselves from that prison, because it is a prison. Who'd be interested in getting out of jail a little bit tonight? Some of you? A few of you, yeah, okay. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Okay, I've got my Twitter handle here, I've got only a handful of slides tonight, but there's a big slide we're going to spend a bit of time on tonight. So if you want a copy of that slide, John Hale speaker, just connect with me on Twitter and you can download that information, okay? So off we go. This is Jarvis. So at 7 he was in Long Beach, at 7 I was in Silicon Valley. By the time I was 13 years of age, I was a member of a sporting club. I had my sporting gear and I was out there playing sport. Jarvis, by the time he was 13, he was a member of a gang. He was doing drug deals and he had his first firearm. He was very proud of that. Different journey. By the time I was 17, I'd won a state championship in one of my sports. I got a few academic awards, mostly in mathematics, and thanks to my father's help, I think, but I was more of a jock. And at 17, I was elected as head boy for my school. Now, at 17, Jarvis had stolen a dozen cars, killed a number of people, was on a downward spiral. So, again, we were the same age, we grew up in the same state, but we finished up in a very different state at 17. By the time Jarvis was 19, he was convicted and imprisoned for a triple murder. He killed 3 people, he was caught, and he was incarcerated. But it didn't stop there. By the time Jarvis was 23, he was convicted of murdering a prison guard. And in the state of California, if you murder a prison guard, you get life. And he got transferred from his county prison to a place called San Quentin. Who's heard of San Quentin? Not a pretty place. You don't want to be there. All right. So he finished up at San Quentin. So a little bit on further, he was in San Quentin, and at 28, he was sitting there with a life sentence. At 28, I got married, and I have 4 kids, which is a kind of a life sentence. My daughter Rebecca's here tonight. Sorry, sweetie. But we had our own life sentences. My life sentence hasn't been too bad. But what was interesting about Jarvis's life sentence is that in San Quentin, there are 2 types of inmates. There are those that may get parole and there are those that are on death row. And if you kill a member of the prison establishment, you generally get death row in that prison. So every morning when he wakes up, he doesn't know if it's going to be his last, because the administrator in California might decide to bring him down the queue a little bit. And there's an ugly green room at St. Quentin Prison. It used to be a gas chamber in the 40s. That's how they used to kill people. But now it's an injection room. And that's how they terminate people. So this is where he was at 28. So, you know, we don't know when we're going to die. He didn't know when he was going to die, but he knew he was going to die at some point. Now, it's a bit heartening to know that he's still alive today. But he nearly wasn't. And it was probably about 10 years ago, and Jarvis was out in the yard with the other inmates. And it was an interesting time of the day. It was around that time when the guards wanted to get some food and the mess hall was open. So there was a changeover of the guards. There wasn't a lot of security in the yard. And it had been raining, and a seagull had flown in off the ocean. And there were puddles around, and the seagull was playing around in the puddles, as seagulls do. And one of Jarvis's inmates saw the seagull, and he reached down, he found a bit of broken asphalt. He reached up, and he went to lobby it, like a missile, at the little seagull. And Jarvis at that point didn't want to see the seagull get slaughtered. He'd seen enough. He wanted to make a difference. So he reached out his hand, and he put his hand on the arm of the inmate who was about to hurdle this rock. And there was a problem with that. Because in prison there's something called personal space. You don't touch people in prison. And the other thing in prison that people don't have a lot of is freedom. And what little freedoms you have, you enjoy. And if you're an inmate, you want to have some freedom, you want to hit a bird with a rock, you take that freedom. But if another inmate says to you, I'm going to invade your personal space and I'm going to take away that little bit of freedom you've got, you get very angry very quickly. This guy said, what the blankety blank are you doing? What's up with that blankety blanket bird? Hey? Fill in the blank. And within about 10 seconds, there's 5 or 6 other guys gathering around. Fight, fight, fight! And Jarvis is going, I've seen this 1,000 times before. I'm not walking out of this yard alive. I am a dead man. So what was interesting for Jarvis is he had a world that was connected to that bird. A compassionate world. He wanted to save that bird's life. But he connected with it in a way that upset a known world, which was fairly rigid. So 2 worlds collided in that moment, which is pretty horrible. So I want to take a couple of steps back now. I want you to transport you into your own organisations. Not that they look like that. And what I'd like you to do is think about your executive team. Right? Is Rob still here? This is the CEO piece he needs to hear. Never mind, we'll catch him. And what I want you to do, before I give you the exercise, I want you to buddy up with someone here. So if you're in a row with 3 people, you're going to have to turn around or change seats. So probably someone you haven't met. Just find a partner, introduce yourself. Say, I'm so-and-so from such and such. I'm going to get you to do a little exercise together. So off you go. Find someone to have a chat with. Here's your exercise. There are 2 worlds. World A, senior management team, CEO, CFO, CEO. They discuss the issues, they listen to ideas, they make decisions, and they advise the HR manager. World B, CEO, CFO, CHRO. They meet together, they discuss the issues, they make decisions, and then they advise the operations manager. 2 different worlds. They'd operate somewhat differently. In small groups, discuss these 3 points as quickly as you can. We'll go 3 or 4 minutes. Which environment is easier for a CEO to manage, do you think? If you're a CEO, what would you prefer? Which is more likely to reveal new issues that you're not currently looking at? World A or World B? And which do you think is better? Off you go. Thank you very much for doing that. Just want a little straw poll at this point. As a result of your discussions, just curious, how many feel that World A is better? How many people feel that World B is better? Oh, wow, a lot of you. How many people said it depends? Okay, so some are having 2 votes. That's okay. We're allowed to do that. So there's a leaning towards B and it depends. But the more depends. Okay, all right. Well, this depends thing is really interesting. 3 blind executives went to Asia to source a new product, but they were blind. And it depended on which executive you spoke to, determined whether we should have imported the product or not. He said to the first executive, he said, what's the new product like? And he said, well, it's like a big snake and you get really wet, so we need to do some occupational health and safety if we bring this one in. And the second executive said, look, crikey, it's huge. It must weigh 4 or 5 tonne. What the heck do we want this for? And the other executive, like playing around with it, and he's going, you sure this is supposed to be for us? So it really depends on the context, on a whole range of different things. So the elephant in the room often is the worldview of the people in the room. And these are 8 worldviews. Has anybody seen them before? Okay. So what I want you to do, once I've read through them, is I want you to pick a number, 1 through 8. You might be 1, 7, 5, whatever your number is. It doesn't define you. There's no right or wrong. It's just a sense that I tend to see the world a little bit this way some of the time, most of the time. You know, that's the way I am. And what I want you to do is once you've got your number, I just want you to share that number with the person next to you. Just say, I'm a 5, I'm a 3, I'm a 6, whatever. All right? So we just want to keep track of where the numbers are. Does that make sense? Okay. So, are you a 1? The world is a natural milieu where humans rely on instincts to stay alive. Or 2, the world is a magic place alive with spirit beings and mystical signs. All right? So, you grew up in Byron Bay, sweetie. You remember what that was like? It's a jungle where the strongest and most cunning survive. The world is an exordered existence under the control of the ultimate truth. A marketplace full of possibilities and opportunities. A human habitat, which we share life's experiences. Or a chaotic organism forged by differences and change. Or is the world an elegantly balanced system of interlocking forces? So have a think, pick a number, and then just share it with the person next to you. What number do you think you'd pick? Anybody not got a number yet? Pick a number. Share your number with your partner. Let's move on. Okay. There we go. Want to hand out some hats. Did anybody pick one? Nobody picked one? All right. I get to wear that one. Anybody pick two? All right. Could you pass that down to our two person? Thank you. And do anybody pick three? Thank you. 4, 5. I'll come over here. 6. Anybody pick 7? There we go. Anybody pick 8? A little bit far away. That's okay. If you're 8, you won't mind. So just hold on to your little hat. We're going to have a little conversation with these hats in a little while. But before we do that, I just want to get to a bit of a definition. So Andrea is talking tonight about diversity, and the definition of diversity that I wanted to work with tonight was the definition of cultural diversity. And this is the big challenge I see in organisations, is bringing cultures together, because this is when worlds tend to collide. So cultural diversity, a definition, is the variety of cultural and ethnic groups within a society or an organisation. And what tends to flow from that is we get new values, exposed to new values, we have different worldviews, and we have a source of fresh ideas. I've got 3 questions for you in terms of cultural diversity. And the first question is cultural diversity important in your organisation? If you believe cultural diversity is important in your organisation, raise your hand. Okay, so about 90-95% of you. Well, guess what? That's exactly what my audiences say. When I speak to people, it's about 95%. We all know it's important. All right. Second question. How good are you as leaders at managing and leveraging and embracing and engaging with cultural diversity in your organisation? How good are you? Are you good at it? Yes or no? If you're good at it, put your hand up. If you're not, keep your hand down. Okay, so about half of you, which again, is not much of a surprise. Now, it is subjective, and what I notice in large corporations, in big economic superpowers like China and America, when you speak to the CEOs of those, yeah, we can do anything. Cultural diversity, I'll do it in my sleep. Yeah, I can do that. Right? So if you've got a big ego, you can do anything. All right? Cultural diversity, yeah, well, we can do that. That's not a problem. Okay, so confidence is not necessarily a measure of competence. So that's really it's really an ego question, that one. All right? Here's the third question. And the question is your organisation doing enough? Yes or no? If you think your organisation is doing enough, say yes. If you think your organisation needs to do a lot more, say no. How many people think their organisation is doing enough in terms of embracing cultural diversity? Mm-hmm. So you've got about 10 or 15% of the room. Okay. Usually get about 2%. And if I'm running this with a big company like Toyota, I've got all the staff in the room, and there's 100 people in the room, who do you think the people who put their hands up are? The HR manager and the person sitting next to them. Okay, we do cultural diversity, what are you talking about? But everybody else in the organisation has no clue about this cultural diversity program. It seems to be a secret HR seems to have, and they project it onto the organisation. So what this tells me is, though we talk cultural diversity, we believe it's important, we think we're good at it. When we ask a non-homogenous group of people from an organisation, from a culture, it's the HR department that says, well, we do it well. Everybody else says, oh no, we need a lot more help on that because we don't know how to do that. So this is kind of the gravity of the situation. And what we're coming up against is rigid worldviews. This is the way it's always been done. This is the way it needs to be done. And cultural diversity is fairly new in terms of our monocultures that our business has been growing up in. So this is a definition of a rigid worldview. And a rigid worldview creates people with blind faith. Right? And the way we create blind faith in a person is we take a known thing and we reinforce it. And we create certainty over and over and over again. And if we do it really well, we can create a really blind, faithful person. So if I was in Yemen or Afghanistan and I took a young fellow who's 13 and I gave him a corrupt version of the Quran that was printed in some printing press in Saudi Arabia and said, see that bit about rising up against the West and giving your life in a jihad so that you can have 72 virgins? They go, really? They said, yep. And then they run it over and over and over again. Then that's why these guys show up and they blow themselves up in malls and all over Europe and around the world. This is how you create blind faith. Right? It doesn't happen there, it's happened in the West. In my consulting practice, I often finish up supporting people in all sorts of really interesting ways and some really tragic ways. And some of the major religions in the world took 13-year-old boys 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 40 years ago. They said, you're 13, you want to give your life to God. We're going to cut you in half. You can give your heart to God, you can give your head to God, but we're going to cut off your creativity. We're going to cut off your intuition. We're going to cut off your sexuality. We're just going to cut you in half. And you can walk around for the rest of your life talking about God, but you can't touch your sexuality because you need to save yourself for God. We have blind, faithful people out there, and of course there's a big shadow that follows them because they're human beings and it leaks out sideways. And unfortunately on my couch I've had a lot of people that have been the victim of that shadow, and it's tragic. You lock the human intelligence down below here and all sorts of horrible things happen. So blind faith is something we need to watch out for. There's some good news though, and that's the creativity formula. And a colleague of mine, Frederick Harron, who I met at the Global Speakers Conference last year, he speaks on creativity all over the world. He's a wonderful fellow. And he has a formula of creativity, and I borrowed it from him tonight. And he says, an idea of merit, take a person takes a known thing and they combine it with another known thing. So in the world of consulting, we often call this lift and shift. We see, say, another consulting firm doing something cool, so we grab it. And we mix it with our stuff and we say to the client, I've got an idea. All right? So that's the creative process. All right? The Mac operating system was pinched from Xerox. All right? But if we go back to the blind faith for a minute, in 2007, what sort of phone did you have in your hand? Anybody?
It wasn't allowed.
Nokia. You weren't allowed one. You had a Coca-Cola phone. Most of us still had a Nokia phone because they had 40% of the phone market. Their market capitalisation was 150 billion, and their senior executive team were all men, of the same age, all came from Finland, all went to the same business school, all went to the same private schools. They came from the same cultural background. So Nokia had a blind faith that they would continue to be the leading phone company in the world, and to progress they just needed to do some incremental things from time to time and they would maintain their market share. All right. In 2007, Apple introduced the phone that almost everybody else in the room's got today, and I know that because Apple does a tremendous job of supporting iPhone users in this country. There's a disproportionate number of geniuses in this country than there is anywhere else in the world. How many people in the room have got an iPhone? How many people don't? Okay, so probably about 80% of you have got iPhones, right? And what happened at Apple was instead of having a monoculture at the executive level, Steve Jobs said, I just want to hire the smartest people. And I said, why? He said, because they can tell us what to do, rather than we know what to do, which is what they were talking about over there at Nokia. So what was really cool is that we've got a camera up there filming me tonight. I've also got an iPhone over there filming me tonight. And when I bring the footage off both those devices, I won't be able to tell the difference. In fact, the quality on the iPhone might actually be better. Because what's happened with computerization of imaging, it's eclipsed the optical world. And if anybody's got an iPhone 10, you know what I'm talking about, all right? So what they did was they took a phone and married it with a camera. That was a great idea. They took a computer and married it with a phone and made an iPhone. They took a phone and married it with a watch and made an iWatch. That's creativity in action. And that's what you can do with diversity. If if you start to mix up your group. Unlike Nokia, finished being sold, I think they've been sold twice since they made that mistake. Who here has heard of Abraham Maslow? Maslow? Maslow. Who's heard of Maslow? Maslow's needs. So about half of you. Okay. Who here has heard of Albert Einstein? All of you. Great. Who here has heard of Clare Graves? None of you. Yet Clare Graves, Albert Einstein and Abraham Maslow were great mates. Now, they had different energies. They were quite a diverse group of friends, but they met quite regularly. And Einstein was full of ideas and met with all the leaders of the world and did some big things on the stage. And Maslow was sort of more charismatic, you know, he was interested in the people and the hearts and all that sort of stuff. So he was quite interactive with people. But Clare Graves, he was an introvert. He kind of just hid away in a little office in MIT. And he thought long and hard about his conversations with Einstein and Maslow. And he studied anthropology and sociology. And he studied the human condition. Very smart fellow. But didn't have anywhere near the notoriety of the other players. And he came up with a model of values that was probably, it's 50 years ahead of its time. It came out, we had a cursory look at it, we threw it away. But it's a really nice piece. And he came up with a manifesto towards the end of his life. It's called The Quest. He said each stage of human existence, the adult, which is all of us, is on their quest for the Holy Grail, the way of life they seek to which to live. At the first level, they're on a quest for automatic physiological satisfaction. At the second level, they seek a safe mode of living. This is followed in turn by a search for heroic status, power and glory, and then a search for the ultimate peace, and a search for material pleasure, a search for affectionate relations, a search for the respect of self, and finally a search for peace in an incomprehensible world. And this is what he said. And this is his value spiral. This is what he came up with nearly 40 years ago. And it maps really well onto the world. And it maps really well onto organisations that are big enough to swallow it. As you look at those 8 levels, there's not many people at the bottom and there's not many people at the top. The large majority of us are in the middle. And when that diagram comes up in a minute, you'll notice that there's a lot of light space at the top of the diagram. There's a lot of dark space at the bottom. And at the lower levels, fear tends to play with us and take us into our head. At the higher levels, we're able to transcend the worrying mind. We're able to make room for love in our relations with one another. So as we can see here, less than 1% of the world live here. 10% live here, 20% live here, 40, 30, 10, 1, and less than 1% here. But look at the ratio between power and proportion. People that operate at this level have 10 times the power than people at this level. Do you recognise some of the faces in there? They're archetypes for these different energies. So the bottom 2, one's a starving child in the Yemen. Another is a child soldier in Yemen. She's a girl. Vladimir Putin sitting there at the top of the ecocentric level. As we move up, we've got the religious right, which I've represented by the Catholic Church. We've got the richest man in the world. Who knows who the richest man in the world is? Anyone know? Bezos. Yeah. Jeff Bezos. 160 billion. I think 4 or 5 years ago it was Warren Buffett and Bill Gates are about 70 billion each, but he's eclipsed that. So he's our orange man. And then socially conscious people, there's not so many of them around, but you know, we're seeing more and more of them with Sea Shepherd. The lady there is a lady called Claudine Andre. And you know about her, bonobo lady.
Oh yeah.
Yeah? So she realised that this particular species, the bonobos, who live in the Congo, probably one of the most violent places in Africa, it's the only place they live in the world. And they are more like human beings in terms of DNA than an Indian elephant is to an African elephant. They are closer to us in terms of evolution than any other species on the planet. And the mothers of these babies are slaughtered for bushmeat, and the little infants are left hiding in the bushes, shaking like a leaf to die from from post-traumatic stress. And this beautiful French lady collects them up, takes them to a sanctuary, and she tries to nurture them and bring them into the world, and she loses about 50% of them. But after 3 or 4 years, she introduces them back into the wild. So this is an example of a socially conscious person. So for many years, I sent a lot of money over there to help build that facility, which is my little green thing going on. Does anybody know the next lady on the diagram? Anybody done the work yet? Byron Katie's work? Okay, all right. Byron Bay came to Brisbane tonight. Never mind. This is a lady who works with this idea of projection. And it's really powerful. When we're in an argument with our spouse and we start judging our spouse or our boss, we need to take a step back and look and own some of the judgments as self-judgments. So she does work in that space. So she's very much a yellow person. I can't imagine anybody knows who the last guy is. Anybody heard of Muji? Okay, all right. He's an enlightened master that's around at the moment. All right, he's based in India and he teaches people how to become enlightened. And there's very few people like him on the planet. But what you notice as you move up through the levels, we move from certainty and survival, certainty and magic, significance, growth, connection, contribution, and finally to compassion. So this was the model that Graves came up with. And I want to have a little conversation around this. Now, what's important and what Graves realised is that we don't just sit at one level all the time. In my life, I've existed at every one of those levels. I'm not stable in 8, I'm not even stable in 7. I tend to hang around in 5 and 6. But not long ago, I was in 1. So I'll put my hat on and tell you a bit about that. I was terrified. You got a tissue? I had a very acrimonious separation from Rebecca's mother. It was really tough. I lost my home, I lost my children, had an apprehensive violence order put out against me even though I hadn't been violent. I had no money, my bank accounts were stripped. It was just a horrible experience. I just went down through all the levels and I finished up there. It was a horrible place. And some of us may remember those really stressful times in life where you didn't know where your next meal was coming from. Right? So it's possible to get there. Right? And there was one night in a cheap hotel somewhere in West Ballina where I was absolutely living in this space. Yeah? And I had to rebuild myself through purple and red and work myself up through the levels. And because of some friends, I was able to get myself up reasonably quickly. So life can take us down there fairly quickly, but we can also work our way up. Life will allow us to do that as well. All right, where's our purple person?
Blue when I was in the military.
Yep.
I went through yellow.
Yep. This is orange. This hasn't come up well on site.
Sorry, and then I'm heading towards that.
Yeah.
Socially compassionate, contributing in other ways.
Yeah. So often I find in my life when I work with people in the military, they have experiences that you and I will never have. Experiences of the spirit. They see comrades in arms die before their eyes. They get in touch with an aspect of our experience that was never born and will never die. The soul. All right? So when we start to get to this level, our experience is less about ourselves, less about our immediate environment, our corporation, our marketplace. It's about who we really are and who everybody else really is. And there's just a oneness that comes together in that space. It's ecumenical. Thank you. Nice to see you here. All right, any questions about hats, colours? Because I'm going to send you in an exercise in a minute where you need to work with these. Before I do that, I just want to ask a couple of questions. I'd like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to put their hats back on. Just ask a couple of questions. So red, what do you think of purple?
I think they're fine, but there might be a bit of groupthink and a bit of following going on.
Are they useful to you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, okay. And the next question I've got is, what do you think of blue, these goody two-shoes? What do you think of them, the ones that like to keep law and order?
Might have been blue occasionally.
Yeah, right, okay. But you know, the regulators, those people that make life a little bit tricky sometimes.
Yeah, I guess that's what society is.
Yeah, okay.
Civil.
But you've got ways of dealing with them, haven't you? Well, when you're in charge, you will, won't you? Yeah, I get that. Yeah, okay, good. What about these orange ones over here, Sam? Like these ones that, out there making lots of money and have lots of possessions and stuff like that. What do you think about them?
I feel like I need to take this orange colour.
No, I think that's fine as well. I think, people are jealous of those people. That's really unproductive. I don't think that's...
Okay.
they shouldn't be despised. Right?
Yes. So what we know about red is that red is very jealous of orange. They're in charge, but when they look up the street and they see the private jet, well, this guy owns about 50 private jets and he's taking over the export trade for parcels in the world. They do get very jealous and they get a little bit angry. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. I know it's not about you, it's about red. It's very good. All right. So as blue, if I need to comment on purple, all right, I'm a bit worried about them because they believe in magic. They're a little bit superstitious. I'm a bit worried that they follow their intuition too much and that they don't have standards by which they live by, and they might steal something from my garden when I'm not looking. Because they just don't have much law and order. Then as blue, I look at red and I go, these guys are bullies, and when no one's looking, they get away with shit. I don't like that. I'm going to call the ACCC, I'm going to call the police, I'm going to call the regulator to keep this red person in line. Right? And when I look at the orange people, over here I go, that's okay as long as they do it correctly. I'll be watching. All right? So the part of you that's competitive, the part of you that values your job from the monetary point of view, the part of you that would love to have twice as much income as you currently have, speak from that place.
That's not me.
Okay. Did we have some well, if it was you.
Yeah,
All right.
competitive and have a constantly and
All right. From what you've elicited from this orange meme, what would orange think of red? This power god here.
I would need to approach them a lot of times.
You would.
And their focus is different to mine.
Yes. Are they useful in terms of your money making?
Yes.
There they are, yeah. You can put them in charge of the mine in South Africa and they can just make it print money for you, right? So it's a very materialistic meme. Maybe you kind of picked the wrong one for you, I get that. The point about orange is that orange does have this attitude that they have their purpose, yeah? And if I feed them a little bit, maybe that'll help, all right? Orange doesn't pay too much attention to blue. It just gets on with business until blue pulls them up. All right, where's our green person? What do you think of red over here? Power god.
Sometimes I'm uncomfortable, but
Yes.
try to understand their side as well.
Of course, it's very socially conscious
From a
of it.
different environment and
Yeah.
culture, so try to just see from their side.
Yeah.
If they just push me to just be in that way, that would be a little bit hard.
Yeah.
I can't be that type of person.
Yes, yes, yeah. What do you think of these greenies that go around half naked, putting things on their body, carrying on about coal seam gas and stuff like that? What do you think of those?
Yeah, just a bit head in the clouds.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, yeah. Did you hear that, head in the clouds? So yeah, these two memes do clash a lot, all right? They kind of got a radar for each other because you've come through blue and you understand, and they do struggle to work with her, but they can. But they have to meet them on their turf and they need to access a bit of yellow to do it. And we'll talk a bit more about that. So you're starting to get a feel for how these start to interact. If you look at the value sets of these different groups and you think about where they might cross over, intersect in the world, you can see how they play out. So it's back over to you now. Put your hands together for our volunteers. And I want you to pair up again. I want you to revisit this question that you looked before, world A or world B. But when you look at world A and world B, I want you to look at the context of your organisation. Is your organisation a blue organisation or a red organisation or a green organisation or an orange organisation? What sort of organisation do you work for? So what level is your organisation playing? Generally speaking, it'll be sitting here for most of you. Some of you may hear, someone here from the Cancer Council tonight. You'll tend to be up here. Adam? Yeah. Yep, okay. Some of you here are working in education about standards, so it's less about making money. It's about getting good in educational design. So you may be a little bit more blue there, yeah, in terms of QUT and those sorts of places. So have a think about where your organisation is, and then have a think about the CEO if you know them, or what you think you might know about them, the CEO, the CFO, the COO, and the HR director, manager, whatever. And just have a look at the two scenarios in your organisation and then decide which is a better world given the players you've got and given the context you're in. Off you go. A few minutes. Thank you for doing that. Who got more clarity doing that? No? Oh, you did. Good. It's pretty messy. It takes a while to get it right. Who changed their view of the world using values? A few of you. Okay. Who saw there are more issues than just A or B? Yeah. There's a lot of issues. So these values, if you can get your head around them, is a new way of seeing the world if you haven't looked at the world through value sets. Because people, in times of stress, they stick to their values. In times of achievement, they hold on to their values. They're very proud of their values. Their values are our home. We can change home, but it takes a little while to change. That's my experience in life. And often people in those ethnocentric memes in blue and orange and green, in my life, when I've been in those values and I became aware of yellow, I wanted to be yellow. Because if I was good, I'd be yellow. Or if I was successful, I should be yellow. Or if I had a big heart, I'd be yellow, which is all the three things that those lower colours have. So the ego gets involved and it keeps us where we feel safe. So be aware of the values that you have and the people around you, and just be gentle and kind with them, because it takes a while to evolve. So the three take-homes I want to leave you with is that our values change under life conditions. When we're strong and we're growing and we're aware, we move up the spiral and our values will change. The person you've had in your organisation for 10 years, they might change through an adverse situation and they might bloom in a new way. They're not always going to be that same way. Or someone who's under a lot of stress outside the organisation may really spiral. They may get down to one of these lower levels. So we do spiral up and down, and our values change when we spiral. And what I've tried to encourage you to do tonight is to reframe what I thought was kind of a problematic issue often in the world of management at the moment. It's like, what voice does HR have in decision making, all right? Because it is often a people business and it needs to be an important voice. And I wanted you to look at that dilemma around values, because at the end of the day, if the values are being recognised, the voices are being heard, if we're capturing the ideas and being creative, then we're looking after the future of our organisation. If we're not listening to those things, then our future's looking probably a little bleak. And the other thing we can do, if we're aware of this model, and again, I've given you my Twitter handle and I'll put it up again in a minute, you can start to explore how you might evolve your organisation, what sorts of mission, values, things you need to start embodying yourself as a leader, so that starts to infect the others. Jarvis. And Jarvis was watching his life leave him because two incomprehensible worlds had collided. There was the world of the seagull that he wanted to save. There was the world of the inmates. And he'd seen those prison yard fights before, and he knew he was in a really bad spot. But he didn't have a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset would have done nothing for him at that point. At that stage, Jarvis had been in green, but in a split second he went to yellow. He connected neurons in his brain that he had never connected before. And when the guy had the rock and was about to smash it through his cranium, because he already had blood pouring out the back of his neck, he dropped down through the levels and he dropped into red. And he looked the other guy in the eye and he said, "That bird's got my wings." And the other men stopped. And there was silence. What did he just say? And then they started to laugh because it sounded so stupid. So a minute before they said, "What's that blankety blank bird got to do anything? You're blankety blank you." And suddenly, peace. And then they just started laughing. And they were rolling around on the yard floor laughing at what Jarvis had just said. And when the guards came out into the yard from the changeover, there's 6 men rolling around on the floor. And what Jarvis says is that years later, he's still alive. He's still alive today. He'd be going to sleep in his bed in his cell at night. And the wardens would do their final rounds. And then hear these voices coming from the rooms nearby. "Hey, Jarvis! What what did you mean by that bird's got your wings? Because they couldn't understand it intellectually. But what Jarvis had done is he understood that those men in the yard were operating from purple and red. They had hard hearts. But he knew underneath them there was a soft part. And that soft part wanted freedom. And that bird was a metaphor for freedom. So he was able to connect their need for freedom with the life of the bird. So he saved his own life and he saved the life of the bird by being flexible enough to take two worlds that were colliding and resolve it. Does that make sense? So when Jarvis came to St. Quentin, he was very much in a purple meme. He just killed a prison guard. And he hung around with a lot of red guys for a while until he got his place of dominance in the system. And after a little while, he got to the library and he learned about law and order and religion and ethics and values, because there's a good library at St. Quentin for prisoners that are interested. And then he got into orange and he wove some baskets that got sold into the community. He made a contribution to the economy of California. And then he started to grow food in the garden for himself and others. He started to become more socially aware of global warming and things like that. And he continued to study and study and study. And he developed himself into a yellow man in a prison full of beige, red, purple men, guarded by blue and red men. He went to yellow. And a couple of years ago, a Buddhist monk travelled from the east to St. Quentin prison, and they initiated him into the Red Tara, which is one of the highest orders of the Buddhist faith, because of his compassionate work within the prison system and beyond. Now, he could be executed tomorrow, but that hasn't stopped him living his life. And he's evolved to that point as a result. So if Jarvis can do that in St. Quentin, I wonder what you could do in your organisation with a little bit of effort, a little bit of intelligence. So my invitation to you tonight is to take this model with you, have a conversation around it, think about the values in your organisation, think about the sort of evolution you want to create for yourself and your organisation. I wish you luck with it.